All right. So today, as you can see, we're gonna learn the art of the Middle Age. So according to tradition, Jesus, known as the Christ, was born in Bethlehem during the reign of Emperor Augustus. In time, his followers would become so influential in world affairs that our common calendar takes as its starting point the presumed date of Jesus' birth, calling it year one. As a matter of fact, the 6th century calendar maker who devised this plan were wrong in their calculations. And Jesus probably was born between 4 and 6 years earlier than they had supposed, but the calendar had nevertheless become standard. The Roman Empire dominated the Mediterranean region from the 2nd century BCE and later extending its control of Western Europe and the Middle East. But by the 4th century, the empire was crumbling in the West. So Christianity was one of the numerous religions in the late Roman Empire, but it quickly became one of the most popular and well organized. And Rome's attitude toward this new cultural force within its borders varied, and often the faith was tolerated, and especially since it came to attract an increasing number of wealthy and influential people. At other times, Christians were persecuted sometimes officially and sometimes by mobs. And one reason for the persecutions was that Christians refused to worship the gods and godness of the state religion, including the emperor himself, in addition to their own god. Clearly, such people were a threat to the political stability and well-being of the empire. And Christianity's situation changed abruptly in the year 313 when the Roman Emperor Constantine issued an edict of tolerance for all religions. And not only were all faith now free to practice openly, but also Constantine himself patronized Christianity. So while battling his political enemies in 312, Constantine had a vision of a cross with the inscription in the sign Concord. He interpreted this to mean that following Christian teachings and worship the Christian God would lead him to victory. He won the battle and converted to the Christian faith. So this is the Arch of Constantine in Rome, and his triumphal arch is a monumental erected to commemorate these victories. It pictures the battle that secured his imperial title, as well as sense of past emperors' triumphs and personifications of victory. So This panel is picturing Constantine and his court features small and stereotype figures, drapery described with thick lines and limited spatial depth. So let's compare ancient Greeks and Middle Age sculptures. So can you find the differences between these two sculptures? You can definitely see the differences, right? What's the difference?
Ancient Greece is like more detailed and more better than the middle-aged one.
Exactly. Yes, that's right. So the left one is ancient Greek sculpture, which was made in the late 1st century BCE, before the century. But the implied motion of the sculpture shows very advanced technique of freestanding sculpture, and the skin and the muscles look very real. And it is hard to believe that the sculpture's material is marble, and it looks very soft. And also, we can feel the dramatic emotions through this sculpture. It feels like we are in the middle of the happening. So it's really hard to believe it is made before the century. On the other hand, look at the right sculpture, the arch of the Constantine. So it looks like a flat sculpture and doesn't show any volume. And also, all the figures in this sculpture depicted as not realistic and very simple. It feels like the advanced Greek technique was going back to the Mesopotamia art, even though this is made 400 years later since the left Greek sculpture had been made. So the reason is that Christianity um, treats artists as craftsmen at the time, and they don't want to make any figures realistic and idealized. And they didn't accept anything beautiful or idealized art, not other than worship of their God Jesus Christ. So they don't care about advancement of artistic technique, and they only focused on the description of the Bible. So that's why many of scholars have called the Middle Age as Dark Age in art. So the same thing was happened in painting as well. All the stories about the Christianity continued for 1,000 years. And they described the baby with the same proportion of adult, just to make it smaller, like this. And this is another example of Middle Age painting. The gold circles behind the figures are representing light. And let's compare the ancient Romance painting and Middle Ages painting. So, like the comparison of a sculpture, the ancient Romance painting is very realistic, but the Middle Ages painting is simplified. That's the difference. So, to conclusion, the style of art in Roman Empire had changed. The beauty of the human body was no longer important to artists. So now art emphasized symbolism and narrative clarity with signs borrowed from pagan art, but repurposed with Christian meaning. The idealized bodies and individualized faces of the classical era had been replaced with stylized figures and generic facial features. However, their architecture techniques were flourished to build churches. So under Constantine's imperial sponsorship, architects raised a series of large, opulent churches at key locations in the empire. So one of these was Old St. Peter's, built on the spot in Rome where it was believed that Peter, Jesus' first apostle, had been buried. And Christianity from the beginning emphasized congregational worship, and so fundamentally different kind of building was needed, one that could contain a lot of people. A multi-purpose meeting hall called a basilica, and it was the standard building types of Roman architects. So based on basilica, the architects of Middle Ages developed three types of architecture style. So first one is Byzantine, and the next one is Romanesque, and the last one is Gothic architecture. Let's see one by one. So this is Byzantine architecture style. The Byzantine emperor Justinian I was a devoted patron of the arts. He funded hundreds of churches, mosaics, and painting throughout his empire. Byzantine churches are grandeur, like this photo, with large scale, and it has dome, which is hemisphere-shaped roof. And this is the inside of Byzantine church. And mosaic was a favored Byzantine technique. Byzantine artists had moved away from the naturalism and realism of Greece and Rome toward a flattened, abstracted style. Like artists of ancient Egypt, Byzantine artists strove to portray often complex religious doctrines and beliefs, not scenes from daily life. And the next one is Romanesque. The Romanesque period was marked by a building boom. Contemporary commentators were thrilled at the beautiful churches that seemed to be springing up everywhere. Later art historians called the style of these buildings Romanesque, for despite their great variety, they shared certain features reminiscent of ancient Roman architecture, including overall massiveness, thick stone walls, and round arches, and barrel vaulted stone ceilings. And it has beautiful single arch windows like this photo. And the last one is Gothic architecture. So the Gothic style was started by a powerful French abbot named Sugar, who wanted to enlarge and remodel his church, the Abbey Church of Saint Denis near Paris. He came to believe that an ideal church should have certain characteristics. It should appear to reach up to heaven. It should have harmonious proportions, and it should be filled with light. To fulfill those goals, his architects responded with pointed arches, ribbed vaulting, and flying buttresses. and it is ornate, linear, vertical elements that direct eye upward. And it has stained glass windows so large, they seemed like translucent walls with the beautiful and exotic colors. Also, their sculptures of the church were made very long, like this photo. So during the Middle Ages, architecture was flourished by building churches. These three styles are clearly different. So the Byzantine architecture, again, is grandeur and large scale with dome and mosaic. And Romanesque architecture is simple and modern with round arch windows. And lastly, Gothic architecture style is sophisticated and extravagant with pointed arches, pointed roof, and stained glass window. So that's it for this chapter. For better understanding the art of the Middle Age, please read the e-textbook in the Moodle room. And we have a discussion today. So please go to week 10 and go to week 10.1. So this is today's discussion topic. So the Middle Age was a time of strong religious belief. Select two artworks, each made for believers of a different religion, and contrast how the artist has emphasized the religious elements of the artwork. Do you have any questions about this discussion?